Hello, everybody. Just in time again. All right. I almost could not find my hat today. I was like, oh man, they're gonna realize I'm a bald man and they're gonna lose respect for me. So I just like had to find a quick one here. No, but actually, look at that. Still have it, man. Look at that. Pretty good. Just white. Yeah. Just try to have kids, man. You get all white hair very fast. Let's get this going here. So this is the little dude from yesterday. I was working until probably like 2 in the morning because like I said before, I mean, like it takes forever for those videos to process nowadays to be able to do the dynamic watermarking, all that stuff, you know. Yeah, the parts really added a lot of more time for me. But the advantage is that I have more time to keep working on my stuff while the videos are processing. And then the disadvantage is that I'm sleeping probably like 5 hours a night because I have to be up in the morning to start class with the kids. But anyway, so this is my little dude so far. Yesterday I worked on the likeness a little bit more since you guys inspired me to, you know, like with the questions about like, oh, can you work the main forms, you know, it's like the primary forms and the secondary forms after you. It's like, yeah, the answer is yes. You can keep working on everything forever. You see like there's some artifacts in there. Those are basically like my stamps, right? Like you know, it's like I still have to fill up those little gaps in there, but it's coming along. So I'm going to start by tackling that problem that I mentioned yesterday, which was the micro bump. Remember, like I mentioned, you know, it's like it would be cool to start adding some micro bump just to figure it out, like that little micro breakup in between the pores. So one thing I'm going to say is this. The best way to do this, I found, is that if you have your model in there, right? I'm going to click the model. We're going to graph material and selected object. So I have my clean current shader network, which is very simple, right? You just have like the cell noise applied as bump in there. So in order to bug track, you know, it's like if you're having trouble with something, the best way is to actually create like a simple shader with nothing in it, basically like maybe a little specular and no subsurface or anything. So I'm gonna do this now just to show you if you are not experienced with the Arnold. So you click shader, and then you can go to AI standard surface, our Uber shader, right? Like the one we're gonna plug everything. And I can just call it like temp or something, just like as a test here, or just like test like that. And then this is basically like a plain shader now. You're just gonna assign to this guy. Assign material right there. The other one, so I don't forget, is called skin 2. So that's the one I'm using right now. And this one now should be just plain, shouldn't have anything. So let me just do a render here. Just go to render, and I'm gonna do like an update full scene. And it should render everything without without any of the color or anything. And I want to see how the forms are looking like. It should be slightly light, the color, right? And it's plenty of reflection in there and everything. And then in this case here, I'm using just my area lights. And then that way it's going to be easier for us to see the height of the bump and everything, right? So if I just go to this little area right here, it's going to be easy to just see things like that. So let's do that thing about like the cell shader assigned to it again. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to get my cell shader. Actually, let's start fresh with a brand new one so you can see how it works. So basically, like I have my shader in here, right? All the parameters in, actually, let's sample this one here, the test. So like all the parameters are clean, right? Don't have anything, just like this is all default values. So I'm going to click right here under geometry down there. I'm going to click the bump mapping. And I'm going to go to the Arnold texture. I'm going to click the AI cell noise, that one. So I'm going to have to plug a channel in here. So I'm going to click and expand the out color. And I'm going to select the out color G, so for green. And then here for the, you see like I have those two values in here. There's a value in the depth, right? The depth is at 1, which is always like super high by default. We're going to be using like 0.0 something probably. It's very, very sensitive. But we're going to be plugging this to the bump value, which is basically the map, right? So we're going to click bump value in here, right there. Now those two are connected. So Alt color G connected to bump value. I can close it. And now I can just go here. Let's just see in the render first what it is doing in there. So if we do like, let's see this one, let's just render it. By default in here, I don't have anything like fancy assigned to that shader. So let's go around here and I have noise, right? And you have, for example, if I plug alligator here, you're gonna see, let's just expand it here. This is basically like the alligator, noise. So we have those octaves in here you can play with, and that adds more complexity to like in-betweens. You see like it breaks up further right there. So you're gonna get some more in-betweens, right? It gets a little bit more complex like that. And that can be used, it's like to break up the skin, like at a micro, super small level. But I found that this one here, the noise 2, right? By default, it looks like this. If you turn off additive right here, right? You get that type of effect. So by default, I'm not playing with any value here so far. I just switched to noise 2, and then additive, I'm gonna just remove, and then you have that type of effect, right? So I'm gonna play with octaves in here. So if I add more, I'm gonna get some, you see like more variation, some smaller ones in between and everything, right? So I can do like 3, maybe even 4, something like that. And then now I can play with the scale. So the scale, it's the opposite. If you wanna go smaller with it, right? You add more scale to it. So for example, if I do 5 by 5 here, you're gonna get like smaller like this. It is all procedural. You should be fine, it's like with your UV maps and everything, you should work across the whole thing. So I have that type of effect. And then obviously like the scale of the bump, the depth of the bump is too high. So I can go back here, click that little arrow, and I can just go here, put just like 0. Let's start with 0.1 at first. So you see something a little bit more discrete, right? But then I can keep going down. And I think like if you go around like 0.05, maybe even lower than that, you should get a nice value in there. And then you can keep going up with the scale here. So if I go, let's say like 20, for example, still gonna need more than that, but just so you can see it, let's just do like in a small area, like here in the cheeks. And let's actually zoom in here as well so you can see better. I actually like this effect in here better than the alligator skin. I think it's kind of nicer. So let's just do something like this so you can see like very much like close up. Let's get it open up a little bit. Let's see where we are. So this is like between the mouth and the cheeks in here, right? So you get that type of effect. So at the end of the day, my scale here, I think the one I found to be more interesting was around 60 by 60 by 60. So that was a good scale compared to the size of the pores that I want to add in there. But then again, you're going to have to go and tweak this value here, because just remember, like this is breaking up the surface quite a lot, right? So the specular is going to look completely rough from a distance if it's too high. So we're going to be tweaking this one. Let's try 0.01, for example. So it gets a little bit more organic. Let's get a smaller area as well. Let's try this and then this right here. Let's try that small area. So you see like it's just a tiny little detail and it might still be a little high. The principle I'm gonna tell you that we're gonna be working with is that you see like if I remove the bump, everything is very shiny, right? So that means that the bump in here is actually breaking up that shininess, like the specular, quite a lot. And I'm doing this by just like breaking up the surface to very tiny little pieces, right? So what are we going to be using to control what's rough and what's not rough? So for example, if I want, for example, the eyelids, right? Like the internal part of the eyelids, which is like wet and you're going to have your tear line in there and everything. I want that to be like basically a mirror. So I don't want any bump in that area. Same around the lips. I don't want bump around the lips. And I don't want all this bump here around the nose, for example. So we're gonna be using a map, a black and white map that I call either like bump height or bump depth map. And then that map is actually gonna control what area is gonna be rougher than others basically like if it's a black area, that's going to be shinier because you obviously like the bump's going to be much lower, and whatever is white and is going to get like more rough like this, and then anything in between is what you imagine, right? So that's basically like that map we're going to be using for bump depth in here. So instead of like using a value like we were doing, we're going to be plugging a map. And that map we're going to control basically like the intensity of the map, the exposure and things like that, to make sure that we get like a nice range that works for both like the bald areas and the areas with more bump, right? So it's kind of tricky to get like perfectly, but once you get it perfectly, I mean, like it's easy to figure it out how to adjust it. At this point here, I still feel that everything is very bumpy. See, like there's a little bit of cells in between in there, but it's too bumpy. Let's try like half of that, 0.05. And then you get a little bit more, there's an organic feeling there, but I feel it's still rough, too rough. But let's do something here now. Now that we have, and we are, you know, it's like finally we are seeing what it's doing, right? Like you have all that control, like I mentioned before. I mean, like you want to go higher here, like to be able to see the patterns and everything. You can actually go to a smaller value, and then you can see the big patterns like that, right? What's doing like very cellular, kind of like that. But then obviously in this case here, we're going to be using like a tiny little size, maybe like between 50 and 60. In this case, I'm going to try 60, right? To get like this breakup in there. If it's too high, I can just like, you know, go lower and lower here with my bump depth. But again, this is temporary until we have our map plugged in there. So let's do a little bit of that reverse engineering, right? Like we're going to recreate that shader, the skin shader here, just for as an exercise, right? So we started with a fresh shader. We plugged our bump height in there, or our bump map, which is this AI cell noise. And then here, if you want to create a skin shader from scratch, you're going to just crank this one all the way to 100, right? So it's going to be completely translucent like that. There is no color. It's going to look like a candle, and it's white as well. I'm going to switch to random walk 2. I'm just like recapping what we did already. And then for the scale, we're going to start with 0.13, something like that. And then for the radius is that those values we talked about the other day. I'm using like around 800, 0.4, and then 0.2 here. Sorry, 0.2 as a starting point. So like 0.8, 0.4, 0.2 for each one of the layers of the depth of the skin. And then for the, I'm going to switch like from RGB 0 to 1, I'm going to switch to HSV. And now this mid section here, I'm actually going to bring down to either like 0.5 or lower than that, or to prevent like getting this green tint to my subsurface scattering. So I'm going to try like 0.5 for now. And then the last part is this shader, the color of the subsurface scattering. And the character is going to react a lot to what you do with it. So we're just like playing a little bit with this. Obviously, I'm going to pass you all the parameters for my own skin shader sometime next week, possibly. But for now, I'm just like helping you guys to exercise and see what those parameters are doing here. Let me just, Arnold's like, sometimes it gets into this mode that's just thinking in there and kind of freeze for a second. So what I'm going to do here, let me just go a little bit further like that. And then you're going to see that this coloring here, which is white right now, it makes the character like it reacts very strongly. So one color that I found that was kind of good for like a basic, you know, rendering here was, let me even going to switch to progressive so you can actually see the render happening a little faster in there. So this color here, as you can tell, is not like a super strong color in terms of like the amount of redness and everything. It's almost beige, right? And it's very sensitive to the saturation. So for example, I have 0.256 in here for saturation. If I increase this, it becomes very orange, right? And then I try to avoid that. Like otherwise it gets like, either you want to go for someone who is very suntan and yeah, and things like that. But overall, if you can keep the saturation not too high, you end up like getting like a more natural tone for the face, right? And then the last part here, obviously, we would play with the specular levels and all that stuff, right? So at this point, so we have the bump map plugged in there. I still can see the specular happening in multiple parts. It's just more broken up now. Let's see if we can get like a zoom close up right around the cheeks area here and see how it's behaving with that now that we have subsurface scattering. So let's try something like this. And then let's just do a little isolated area right around here. So we get that nice little breakup with those tiny little specks in there. And then obviously we're gonna be tweaking this for some time, you know, so I keep going with it. But if I look at the, for example, reference like this one, right? And you go like for a super zoom to areas like that, you're gonna see like this tiny little specks happening everywhere in there. And the intention is to actually try to capture some of that. Obviously the scale is different here, and we're probably gonna have to go a little bit lower than that. But to actually, the intention is to break up the surface so we get those tiny specks. And let's see, for example, if I go to my cell noise, again, this is gonna be temporary, the depth in here, but let's try something even smaller, so 0.03, for example. So now I get a little bit more broad, and then at this point here, I don't have my displacement map assigned, right? So it's just a breakup to help me out, like adding more of an organic feel, and that actually works as a glue for all the displacement maps. So if the displacement map doesn't look like the distribution of pores and everything is like is on point, those little guys here try to actually even out everything, you know. So it's cool to have this like this little pass in there for the specular. We might have to go a little bit higher or lower, but overall it should be a nice pass for us to start with. And then I'm just like showing you this more like the concept behind what we are going to be doing in the next couple of days, right? Again, probably like next week we're going to be talking more about shaders and the albedo color we're going to be painting and everything. But I want to introduce you guys to some of those maps, for example, like this this bump depth map, just to control what you're seeing here. Let's just do something here. Let's click the shader again, and I'm gonna turn off, if I have coat is at 0. So the only thing happening here is the specular, right? So the specular, as you can tell, I mean, like if I go lower, it's gonna get shinier and shinier, very wet, right? If I go higher, then it becomes like more and more rough, the surface. But we don't wanna do this with the roughness here, right? Although later we're gonna add the roughness map just as a little help. The main intention here is to actually use that breakup that we are using there as a height in order to basically like modulate this roughness in here with the height of the map itself, the bump map, right? So at this point here, let's do something. Let's keep, just for the sake of it, around probably like 0.180 or 0.2, something like that. And then we can reduce the amount of specular a little bit. So we can see a little bit of that. And this is basically like just like the sharp specular that we're gonna be seeing like reflected in those tiny little spots that I show you, kind of like a, you know, it's like a plasticky feel in the skin, right? But then there's another pass that's gonna be, let's just go down here, so no specular whatsoever. There's another pass that we're gonna be using the coat for. So this one here, if I use the coat, you see like by default, it's just like the name says, like it's a clear coat kind of on top of it, right? But you can play with this and add more roughness, for example. So if you have like something like a 480 here, or even higher than that, then you start getting that kind of broad speck in the skin that's more like kind of like the sweat, right? Like it's almost like the sweat layer. And then this one as well, we're gonna be playing with the map to control it. And then you have the index of refraction in here. If you crank it, obviously it's gonna get more and more metallic. So I would not go too high, because otherwise it really gets very metallic looking, right? But something around like 1.5, 1.55 should be okay. But this is gonna be like a secondary kind of spec that we're gonna be playing with. I mean, the same, you know, until we find like this. It has always to be a combination between the height of the bump map right? Combined with the displacement map, all those things gonna break up the surface in a way that after we have like a good base with the form itself, then we can play with the coat and try to find a happy medium, you know. Obviously, because we are controlling the roughness of the skin with a bump, there are certain areas that we're going to need more or less specular in the map as well, so we can actually paint those maps. So let's look at the zebra side of things now that we have this done in there. It's like, it's very simple. You saw like not much was done. We basically created this one from scratch now, but we're going to be doing more work later. So let's take a look at the zebra side of things. So in ZBrush, this is the current sculpture since yesterday. I made his teeth a little bit more crooked in there to kind of like look a little bit more like the reference, roughly, right? Still a lot of work to do with likeness. For the eyes, I noticed that his eyes, and some of those other guys as well, they have those eyes that they kind of like, they are kind of like they a little droopy on the sides, you know, kind of like the outer part. So I kind of like that look, and I noticed in him as well. So what I did, basically, like if you have a decent topology around the eyes, you can always select by topology like this. Let's do like a symmetrically, right? Select by topology like that, and then use like a click control and then outside, so you can do like a soft selection. And all I did was just center this around here, right? And then use the local symmetry, and then I just did a little rotation, you know. So that's basically what I did with a nice soft selection, just to get that a little bit more rotated. You can get like evil, right? So that's the only thing I did, but the rest I actually just like kept tweaking forms and going a little bit more asymmetrical with the mouth like we started yesterday. So once I have this in place here, let's pretend you guys are starting from scratch on your side. I already have my models in here, but basically what you're gonna do from this model here, you can just click duplicate, right? And it's gonna create a copy of this object. But everything that's HD is not gonna be considered. When you duplicate a model, or when you create a clone of the model, the HD is wiped, right? So you don't have like HD in two models. You have to, you know, if you want HD, you have to actually subdivide it again in HD. But in this case here is exactly what we need. So what I'm gonna be doing, I'm gonna make sure that I have a model that has exactly the same UVs, right? Because obviously you're gonna be exporting different maps, you need the same UVs. And same topology and everything. So creating a duplicate is the best way. And then this duplicate, depending on the type of map I'm gonna be exporting, for example, if it's just, let's say a specular map, or you know, a bump depth map, I can get away with a very low resolution kind of mesh and export the maps and be just fine. So at 1 million polygons, I don't need more than that. And then for other types of maps, maybe like, let's say like the specular map, if I want a little bit more variation in the spec, just to create like these little pockets of sweat in different areas, then I can go a little bit higher. But I'm not going higher than 4 million polygons per subtool for the different maps. And all the maps I'm painting inside of ZBrush. So let's pretend you guys just duplicated this one. And now you have a different model in there. And let's call that model, for example, let's do the bump depth here. Let's call the model bump depth. For example, you can rename it. And if I go higher in resolution, you can see I have more resolution in there, right? But I don't need it. So I'm gonna just delete the top level just to keep my scene a little smaller. So I'm gonna go to 1.1 million, which is my highest before HD, right? And then let's just delete the higher here. And then I have just 1 million for this pass. Because if you look at the map itself, it looks just like this. So this is the bump depth map, right? There is no like, other than the visual clues here, what you're seeing here is basically what I'm shooting for. I can do some quick demo here, but really there's nothing special about it. I can show you, for example, like I use this standard brush with no alpha whatsoever. And I use an RGB with a very low intensity, like maybe like 2 or something like that. And I start blocking, for example, like a mid-level of gray. In this case here, if I just like sample an area like this, my mid-level of gray looks like this, like 104, right? For all the values RGB. So you start with a color like that, or you can start with white or whatever you want to do. But that's kind of like my mid value right now. This is kind of like, you know, from 0 to 255, it's almost halfway, right? It's kind of like a level of gray in there. And then for everything I need to paint, for example, there is a bug in here that happens. For example, like if you go to flat color and then you switch to, for example, I can pick any color in here, right? But if I switch, to, you know, it's like to black, look what's gonna happen. It switches the shader. So this is a bug. It wasn't supposed to work like that. But you can go like pretty close to black without it doing it. So you can go, you know, it's like and do that, or you can paint with another shader. For example, use skin shade so you can see more stuff. But basically, like I go and I paint everything symmetrically. If it's not symmetrical, you can just use like a posable symmetry, right? Right there, just make sure that it goes across both sides. And then I make sure that I paint in very like thin layers. So for example, here is a little bit strong, right? I'm using like 100 for RGB. Let's bring it down to like 2 or 3, maybe 2. And then I'm just gonna do very, very like, you know, this type of stuff here is controlled by my pressure, right? So I can just go like very slowly in the same area. And then think about like, okay, what areas I need to be a little bit more wet, right? Like probably around here, this little pocket around the eye, a little bit more wet. The nose, definitely more wet. And then if I need it to be more wet, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna paint more and more like darker, right? So I'm gonna paint darker and darker. So his nose up to this area here, I want it to be shiny around this area, but I don't want it to be too shiny on top around here, right? It starts getting a little bit more rough around there. So I'm gonna make a little bit shinier right at the edge right here of the nostril. Something like that. I'm going like totally black inside of the nostril because I don't want any bump to happen in there. And if you don't have any bump, then definitely it's gonna get shinier, right? For the lips, obviously this came from a previous model and she had like those very large lips. And then in his case here, we're gonna be doing the opposite. So we're gonna be painting this lighter because I just wanted, you know, around this very thin lips that he has in there. So I'm gonna paint this lighter like that. And I'm gonna keep like, always imagine like, it's always optional here. I can show you guys how to invert the map in Maya if you need to, but whatever works for you. For example, in my mind, I know that if it's black, it's gonna be shinier. If it's white, it's gonna be more rough. But if your brain, for whatever reason, works the opposite, you can do the opposite. You know, it's like you can paint white where you think is gonna be the shinier stuff. For example, like imagine like, oh, there's more speck. So I'm gonna go whiter. And then you can reverse, invert the map in Maya. I can show you the node, you click in there. But in this case here, I'm just doing what I said, you know, it's like just, if it's shinier, I'm gonna paint darker. Sometimes the lips is good if you can keep a tiny little bit of white. So like, instead of going like full on black in here to make completely shiny, keep a little bit of on the gray, like dark gray side of things, because it's nice to have a tiny little bit of that micro bump covering it, because you know, we're still gonna get plenty of work detail coming from your displacement map. But in this case here, let's see, just gonna look at those little guys in there, and probably this area here gonna make a little bit rougher around the cheeks in here, not by much, just a little bit lighter. If I want very shiny cheeks, I can actually go darker, right? So the opposite's true. And then you see like for the eyelids inside, it's completely black in there and in here, just the inside part, because I want to make sure that when I have like my, you know, it's like bump maps and everything is going to be affecting from here down, but this area is going to be kind of like a mirror in there, because I want that little reflection to be, you know, represented. So it gives the impression that's like a liquid, right? Like there's water in there. So let's do this. And then if I want to go like a little bit more shiny, for example, for whatever reason in the neck area, I can do that. In this case, I'm gonna do the opposite. So this whole area here looks a little bit too rough. So I'm gonna make a little bit shinier down here. So you can go like with a big brush, just make a little bit darker overall. Like this. right? And then I'm gonna even out with the neck, making the neck a little bit lighter. Just gonna sample that color, and then this is gonna be a little bit more specky if I paint lighter in the neck right here. It's like I normally use like very, very pale tones, you know, even for the skin tones. You're gonna see when we are painting. Sometimes it's hard to see with the compression of the video because everything is so subtle. But then when that happens, I normally post like screenshots so you can actually see more clearly what was done, you know. Otherwise, sometimes just like by looking at the videos, you cannot get the whole picture of what's going on. So here what I'm doing, you see like I'm gonna keep like the inside of the nose, inside of the eyelids, inside of the lips, especially like in the deeper spots. I can actually go even around there, and then paint that whole inside of the mouth even darker, so I can get like nice reflection in there, just in case if the light catches that area, it's a little bit more, you know, shiny. Let's just do a solo here so I can actually see what's going on. If you need to go from the inside of the model, obviously, by any chance, go there. And then let's just paint that. And then, so basically like the areas here I'm painting, I'm kind of considering that T-zone, right? Like we're talking about, you know, it's like areas that have more specular would be, for example, like around the forehead, right? Then the nose and chin around there. It's kind of like a T-zone, right? And then obviously you're gonna get some more in the cheeks in here. So the cheeks I'm making fairly shiny, right? You can add a little bit more dark, let's say down here, maybe just a little bit more. And then definitely more here in the forehead, so you can catch like those nice highlights in there, even on the sides. But then around the eyebrows area, I'm keeping a little bit more rough, right? So I'm gonna just like give you like a visual clue of what I'm doing here. And you can see that the map, it's a very, very super simple map. There's no mystery. I'm just gonna add more shininess under, like inside of his ears in there. And then overall here for the ears, you see like I'm painting some darker gray tones in here. But then for the ear itself, like this whole outer area, I'm gonna be actually using some more white, because I want this to be a little bit more rough and not too shiny at the end when I render it. So let's say once you have your map in a way that you like, there are a couple of things you can do. I mean, like you can actually contrast this map a little bit more here inside of ZBrush. I can show you how. Let's see. See, I switched to full black and actually popped the different shader in there. So I'm gonna do a little bit more black around the nose, around here. So a little bit shinier. So two ways I do, you know, is like one is to actually bring this map as is to Maya and just tweak the intensity in Maya. And the other way is this fairly new approach, like since the last 2 or 3 versions of ZBrush they added, which is like under the poly paint. Now we have like adjust colors, which is really cool, right? So if you have adjust colors in there, you can adjust the whole thing like your poly paint. So basically like you can get like your contrast, right? And you can get those colors to be more distant from each other. So basically like I'm not gonna go full contrast. I'm gonna do like something in between. So I'm gonna go a little bit more contrasting in here. And then when I bring to ZBrush, I still gonna have to tweak my map, because you have to remember like it's either like pure black or pure white for like the bump depth to be like at full 1 or full 0, right? So anything that I do in here, I still gonna have to compensate in Maya. But if it's visually more helpful to have something more contrasty like that, then by all means you can do it here, you know. So let's gonna go back to this one that's kind of a little bit softer transitions, and I'm gonna keep the way it is. And let me just check here if my bump depth is named. So my subtool is named bump depth, right? And remember, we are not exporting any displacement maps. We're gonna be exporting just the color map. So we don't need to do that switch morph target or anything. It's just like plain whatever we get, we're gonna be using. So I'm just gonna rename this. to bump depth, and I'm gonna put my iteration, which I think is like 7 by now. And then I'm gonna go to Z plugin. For this map, I don't need to use a 8K map. I'm gonna use like 4Ks. I think like for this type of map, maybe even 2K would be okay, but I'm gonna just use 4K. And then I'm gonna turn off my switch morph target, don't need that. And turn off displacement, turn on texture from painting, right? Poly painting. And then I'm gonna create my maps. It's gonna be the first color map we're gonna be exporting. So let's go bump depth 7. So let's see how this turned out. It should be super fast to export. So that's the second, and then the third map. So it took us 18 seconds, which is not bad. So now let's take a look here. Let's get this guy to remove completely his subsurface scattering, just so we can see what's going on, right? So I'm gonna remove it again. Let's see how he renders without the subsurface. We are back to that gray shaded, right? And then let's take a look at if we add again, just for the sake of it, let's add again, remove the coat, and let's add our specky here so you can see exactly what's going on. So we got the specular back in there. And then let's do like, yeah, the roughness is okay as at 180. Let's get the color of the skin a little bit more gray, right? So you can see what's going on with the surface. So let's get around there. And now let's apply that map. That's the bump height map. We're gonna assign to this. And the intention here is to do this. I'm gonna show you. It's for us to see the difference between what the nose and the cheeks are doing, for example. I think it's a good area to, to be able to see what's going on. So you can see right there that I can see all the bumps between the nose, right? Like I get all those little bumps from the bump map, right? Which is the cell noise. And then the intention here is to be able to not see them that much in here, but still see in the cheeks. So basically like this map in here, we're gonna be able to see probably more of them around the muzzle area and the top of the nose, less around here, a little bit more in here, and then much more in here as well, right? So we're gonna try to do that by plugging that map first. And to do that, we're gonna go to our bump. So bump mapping. If I click on it, I'm inside of the shader, which is the cell noise, like not the shader, but the node. I'm gonna click this one to go back one level, that one. And then instead of like a bump depth in here, which again is controlling how deep the bump is, right? Gets like pretty deep right there. Or negative, whatever it is, right? So instead of this, we're gonna be plugging a map. So I'm gonna click this one, I'm gonna click File, right? Remove the filter, switch to off. And then down here, gonna just remove the TX textures. And now we can pick UV tiling. Again, always gonna be the same, so UDIM. Make sure you always select it so you can bring all the textures, otherwise you're gonna get all kinds of artifacts. And then I'm gonna pick the bump depth. Once I plug it, it's not gonna look good at all. Maybe it's not gonna even appear at all, but you're gonna have to tweak this map. Actually, in this case here, it actually appeared everywhere. It's still like everywhere, right? So it's not separated enough. So we know that the information is in there. The 3 maps are found, right? We just exported this one. Now we're gonna have to play with the color balancing here to figure it out. We're gonna have to add like some alpha offset in here. I can use an alpha as luminance first to start with. And I use the alpha as luminance because, it's like if it's a black and white map, that's more likely that's what you're gonna be using. So if I use an offset in here, let's bring this one as the alpha gain. Oh, actually, let me just, before I do this, let me crank the exposure. So the exposure is at 0 right now. So if I crank it like to 5, for example, let's try 5, maybe 10. And then let's try using this alpha offset. Let me try something here. Let me just update the scene just to make sure that everything is like loaded. because sometimes it gets lost, you know, it's like it doesn't show the result exactly like you were supposed to, just because it still has a cached stuff, you know. So now it's the latest. So yeah, you're good before. So let's see which one is the value we're gonna have to use here. So for example, like if I start at 0 with 0, 0, now if I use the like with alpha gain at 0 and I'm just using the offset, you see that this is working basically like just like the overall bump height, bump depth that we were using before, right? So basically like the same applies. So if I use like 0.05 that we used before, actually 0.05 like that. Oh, it has to go a little bit higher, I suppose. Interesting, right? So basically like I'm using everything at the same time, but if I use the alpha gain in here, it's funny that's not separating the two of them for some reason. Let's see. Let's see if this one here gonna have to tweak negative. Yeah, seems like. So now I have a separation. So I get a little bit more. Let's try that. Yeah, okay. So I'm using like, I'm actually having to bring my exposure down. I think the way I exported was a little bit too strong. So it's kind of like whitish. But this one now you can see, for example, if I'm bringing down, you see like the detail is going down in the nose, but I still have plenty of bump around here, right? So that's what we want. So let's see. Let's bring it down a little bit further. And then let's keep the alpha gain at 1 here. So that's what I need. So I have like more bump around that area, not so much in the nose. Let's see how it's doing around the lips, for example. Because the lips, we want to make sure that they are shiny. But with a tiny little bit of bump, they're going to be more shiny in the very inside. But here we want to see the shininess, but a little bit of bump. So that looks good. Let's go to the eyes in here. And inside of the eyes, we should be able to see like almost like mirror right at the edge, right there, and then more bump around it. So now that we have the separation between what's black and white in there, so we can see the difference. Again, I'm gonna go back to the nose area because it's more telling every time. So now if I have that, now I'm gonna have to find what's the, you know, a perfect amount in here. So I'm using like minus 0.4 right now. And I think I can go lower than this. Let's see, it's minus 0.5. So it's a little bit more shiny here. What happens at minus 10 is gonna be completely smooth. Yeah, at minus 10 is very, very smooth. But I mean, like this whole thing is dependent of a map similar to this one. If I had this map more contrasted, exported from ZBrush, you would probably like have to use a different type of exposure in here. So let's try at minus 6. Minus 6 looks kind of nice, you know, it's like you get a little bit of this bumpiness in there. Remember, this is just to break up the speck, right? And so let's see with the alpha offset here. The alpha offset is actually being a good, you know, it's like exaggeration if you want to do that, but it doesn't seem like it's responding too well for like how subtle I need things to be. Let's try to keep this one here. Let's crank the alpha gain. Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be like a play between like this exposure and the alpha gain and the offset until you find like what's the perfect amount. This one, for example, if I keep cranking the alpha, it's the same as being bringing the exposure back, you know. So if I have like a 5 in here, so I get more bump and everything, but maybe just tweaking this guy would be better. But let's see, like a combination of 2, maybe like I keep 3 in here, minus 6. Let's try like that. Let me start with that. And maybe it's too much. It's hard to tell without having the subsurface, because the subsurface really is gonna, you know, obliterate a lot of that stuff. So maybe let's keep it like this for now. So basically, this is the function of the bump depth or bump height map, which is basically like filter those areas, you know, where you want a more shininess and more roughness, right? So in those areas here, if I let it process here a little bit longer, you're gonna see that the reflection is gonna be softer around here. If I want even more diffuse, I can actually keep playing with this one until I bring more of a difference between the this you know, shiny area and a little bit more crusty one, right? So I'm gonna have to play with the off again and probably the offset a little bit. You can use like negative offset as well. Let's see what this, I think you can use it. Let's try. Yeah. So, but I mean, like it's gonna be a combination between those slides, you know, like to find what's the difference. Or you can simply export a map straight from ZBrush and then try to tweak the map, you know, keep painting until you get like the perfect amount in there, you know, it's like everything looking correct. But in my experience, I normally have to play with the exposure at least, you know, it's like in most of the time with the alpha gain as well. So now we have that one. I can go back to my specular in here. And we don't have yet like a specular map plug, right? We're just controlling the roughness of the surface at this point. So I don't know if, yeah, let's talk about the specular map and then we can go back to ZBrush and do more sculpting later. So let's just stop in here and let's look at the second map that I have here. The same principle. You're gonna go to your model, go to the highest subdivision level before HD, right? Something like that. And then duplicate it again. And then you should have a number of polygons, like no more than 2 million polygons at that point, right? And then in this case, the one I have, this specular map, I added a little bit more resolution because instead of like having just like 1 million polygons, I decided to go to 4.4 million polygons. So I can have a little bit more of this noise represented in there. You see like how simple this map is? I mean, like there is not a lot going on. It's like some subtle changes. I do like this painting here using a combination of spray brushes. So let's talk about those brushes. It's not like the other one when I painted, I was not using any alphas and it was just a simple standard. I can do like, I can create a brand new one here to show you. You would basically create a standard brush, same deal, like you go to your brush and then clone it, right? So I'm gonna clone it. So I have a standard one now. And then I'm gonna switch here to spray. And then for the spray color here, I'm gonna tweak it. I'm gonna bring it down to 0. Otherwise, it starts like mixing the first and the second color and creates those crazy variations that I don't want. So if I try to paint anything at this point, it's not gonna look too good. It's gonna look like this, right? Doesn't have any alpha plugged in there. For the broad stuff, you can actually use this, but you see the difference between this. Look, if I do this, it's just like a simple, you know, it's like it's very cloudy there. But if I go to the flowing here and I reduce it all the way to 0, now it's a little bit more spread out, right? You get a little bit less density overall. If you pair that with an alpha, so for example, if I use an alpha, a small one like 42, for example, then you start getting this kind of like, you know, it's like this spray that's very broad like that. And then I'm actually using like a very, very strong intensity here, like 21. Let's do even stronger, 100. So you can actually see what I'm doing, right? And then every single one of those brushes here, each one produces a slightly different result. So 51 gonna be even smaller than that, right? If you want to combine, for example, like with tweaking this curve, the curve of the alpha, then it's gonna get even smaller like that, right? So you can get like tiny little specks like that. Those ones are gonna be useful later. So I'm gonna go back here. And then what I'm gonna do, another thing you can do, you can actually, instead of using this alpha, you can use this spray alpha here as well that's there, or this one, so 23 or alpha 7, right? And that one is basically like it's a spray within the spray, right? So you can actually do a lot of that. But I'm gonna tell you that in the past, if you look at my first classes in there, like back in May, June last year, I was using a lot more noise when I was painting my specular maps, right? And it was creating this funny effect, you know, it's like in certain areas, especially for a skin like his, that's not gonna be like super full of displacements or anything, it's gonna be kind of shallow displacement. It creates this little puddles of reflection that they look quite artificial. So instead of that, I'm actually opting for something that's a little bit less noisy. So I start to paint this, I normally start again, like you can start with a mid-level of gray, right? Like for the whole thing. And then let's just switch back here to, let's try 45. And then I start like this. I use like a very broad, large brush like this. And then you can do, for example, like if you do Let me switch here to stroke, no lazy mouse, otherwise it gets slow. So I can start with a very broad kind of thing like that, right? I can even like remove the alpha to do this first pass. So you get like a little bit of a noise like this, and that's gonna be everywhere, right? Like you're gonna just use like a gray kind of thing. Let's just switch here and do a temporary paint so I'm not just talking theory. So let's duplicate this one, and then let's paint on this one. So let's say, again, you're gonna pick like a mid gray, for example, something like this, right? And then you would probably do something like go to your color, and then you just do like a fill object, right? And you're gonna get a gray color like that. I'm gonna switch to skin shader to start with, and then I can just start painting like the blacks and whites here. So for the, I can go first like with darker stuff. So I'm gonna use intensity. You see, like if I do too much intensity here, it's gonna look very, very dark like that. But I can start with something like, let's try like before 10 or something like that. And I can start like by doing a little bit of a color variation like this. So like it's a broad kind of spray just to block the areas I need more shininess, right? Like something that's gonna be a little bit shinier. So if it's the neck, for example, I'm gonna be painting, let's see how I'm gonna do this. I think you're gonna do it the way I'm imagining now is gonna be, the shinier area is gonna be white. It's gonna be the opposite of the bump depth, right? So shinier areas, I want white. I want more speck in those areas. So I'm gonna start by eliminating the specks in certain areas. So for example, if I don't want too much speck around the ear in here, I'm gonna paint like white, black like that, right? Like just like with a very low intensity, a little bit shinier inside. And then I'm gonna prevent a little bit of this, you know, speck to enter this area here of the nose, and probably around the eyebrows as well. And then I'm gonna be using the same principle to eliminate the speck in certain areas. Like even if it's like a cavity, eliminate maybe a little bit, but not completely. I like the, you know, to have some in the cavities in there as well. And then you're gonna be doing this just with a broad brush like I'm doing here, right? And then the thing to make it look like they're like depths of speck is to actually do a very simple technique here, which is basically this. So you start with a broad brush like I did, like a very large one, right? And then with a very low intensity, and slowly you start doing the opposite. So you crank the intensity a little bit more and make the brush a little bit smaller. So you go again to that area and add a little bit, another layer of noise, but it's just a little bit, you know, it's like a little bit stronger and a little bit smaller. And then if you keep doing this all the way to something like this, right? Then you start getting a lot of variation for the specular. And then the opposite is true when you start playing with the lighter color. So if I switch to white in here, it's going to be the same. So for example, I'm going to start with a small intensity, right? Lower intensity, and a bigger brush, just to bring like the areas I need more speck. So around the nose, right? Around here. But then I go higher and then a little bit smaller. And I start doing that. I'm using like a circular motion with my hand in here, right? And then towards the nose in here. And then layer by layer, you start adding more and more of that. So at some point, you're gonna get like to a higher intensity here, and then it's smaller. So you're gonna get like more specky around certain areas, right? Just to get more variation, especially around the nose in here. But you're gonna go to the point that things are not too specky, you know, it's like like not too small. So for example, if I go for something like this, that looks very small, that's the kind of stuff that's gonna cause like those little puddles of reflection, you know, it's like they're gonna look like artifacts. So at the end of the day, if you did a lot of the work here and things look a little bit spotty like this, right? Like at some point you brought things, it looks a little bit too much. You can always even things out by clicking here and then selecting a mid-level color, something like a gray like this. And then you can go back to a smaller intensity and just use that to blend those colors, right? So basically, like if it's still specky in there, so I'm just blending back that area until it gets a little bit more even. So at the end of the day, that's basically what I was doing for this guy here, right? And you can tell that if I look at the color like this, it's not super spray looking, right? Like there's a little bit of spray in there, but not a lot. I mean, like it's kind of like a simple map. I think I had it more specky, more like splatter before, and I used the smooth brush actually to smooth a lot of that out. So I can use even a little bit more here. As you can tell, like this map here comes from another model, so it's a little stretched and everything. So I'm gonna have to definitely do some tweaking here. But at the end of the day, the specular map's not gonna be very different from this. You see like how simple it is? You know, it's like for the nose, I'm gonna add a little bit more white around the tip in here, like that. Probably around here as well, this side. And if I want a little bit more specular inside, I can do that as well. But the thing that's going to be interesting is that you have to be able to kind of like plan how you're going to be using those maps, because as you can tell, I mean, like I can, for example, like add a lot of speck inside of the nose, paint completely white in there. But then if I'm using like a high bump from my bump depth map, then that's going to be all broken up and going to become diffused because of the surface being broken up so much. So you have to think like smartly, you know, it's like about not making your own maps fight each other, you know. So if you need the lips to be shiny, you make sure that you have specking here, right? But then if you're getting a lot of the speck because you're simply not breaking up the surface with a large bump, right? You're just using a very, very small intensity, then you know that naturally you're gonna be more shiny there. So you don't need to go like full on white in here. You know what to expect from the other map. So it's a play, you know, it's like they have to play nice with each other basically. You know, it's like, so we don't counter them. And you can see that around the eyes here again, like very white, right? It was pure white in there just for the eyelids. So it's super shiny. And then the lips in comparison to the nose, they're not super shiny, right? They're kind of like mid-gray in there or something. And then let's just add a little bit more speck around here, the nose. And at the end of the day, I kind of like expect something like this, you know, it's like not super splattered, but just like enough variation for things. So let's export this map here. And then obviously this is like I said, like a repurpose from another model. So I'm gonna have to keep tweaking it until we get something that works for this guy. And then, but always using this principle, you know, it's like and again, like don't, if you want to do the reverse, like I said before, you can do it. You could paint like the areas that are supposed to be more specky. You could paint it black, for example, and the rest the opposite. Do the negative version of this, right? And then I can show you my how to do it, to plug this. So I rename it to specular 7, which is my iteration number at this point. I want to make sure that all match. Also 4K, I don't need more than that. But this 4K is coming from 4 million polygons now. So we're gonna get a little bit more detail in it. I'll just go create all maps, and then it should export very fast as well. Let's see, that was one. Should be a little bit more, a little bit slower than the other ones, just because it's 4 million polygons now. And then this is the last one. That's a good thing to have just 3 maps, so it's fast. So 19 seconds, not bad at all. So that's our specular map now. So again, like we're gonna be plugging this just to see how things look as a testing here. But don't worry about like if the values are not working at this point, like precisely, because again, like all the parameters of my shaders are gonna be shared with you guys. So once you have a render that looks decent, I'm gonna just like open, okay, here's the shader network. Let's look now and let's copy those parameters to your own models and recreate the shader. And then let's see what kind of results you get from that point on. But for now, we just like still like experimenting with it, right? Like kind of getting familiar with the process. So I think it's important to just like introduce you guys to this. So let's just go to, I have my coat in there and I have my specular. So I'm gonna plug this as a specular weight. And to do that, maybe I'm gonna keep like the roughness very low as a temporary thing. 0.02, which is almost mirror, right? So if I render, it's going to be like very shiny like that. And at least we can see what we are getting. And then for the weight here, as you can tell, obviously, you go lower, right? It disappears. Do I have like a code in here? No. Okay, so it goes completely away. So obviously, if I plug a black and white map, I should be able to control that, right? So let's do that. Let's plug this map right here in the weight, which is kind of interesting. I mean, like if you plug in the weight, at least like for the coat, between plugging in the color channel in the weight, they work differently. If you plug in the coat, it's almost like looks like this. It creates like this black coat, which creates an interesting effect, you know. But it's not the same as plugging here. For example, like if I plug either in the specular or the color, I don't think the result's going to be very different. It might be, but I think it's kind of similar, you know, because you see like it goes down and up again. But if you do that in the code channel, you have to be careful, because if you plug in the color, it looks very different than the weight. So let's plug this one in the weight. And I click File again. Same thing. Just gonna turn off my auto generate textures down there. Turn off my filters. Turn on UDIM. Very important every time. And then let's get the specular in here. And again, let's see what it does from the get-go. Looks very strong overall, right? Like it looks like it didn't change much. So let's play with those values in here. Let's do alpha is luminous first. So let's see if it's gonna change straight away. Yeah, with alpha is luminous, here is luminous. You see that the map starts to work from the get-go, right? If I remove it here, it's actually considering everything is like a RGB map. But if you turn this one, is a black and white map. So actually the alpha is gonna be the intensity for it, right? For the luminous. So this one, in this case, I can play with exposure and I can get it to look more shiny like that, or less shiny. But in the context of being, you know, it's like following what I painted in ZBrush. In the same way, I can actually crank, like, for example, just the alpha gain in here, right? If I want to add more overall light to it, I can actually play with the offset. So everything gets shinier again. So it kind of like the separation between blacks and whites kind of go away. It kind of mixes both of them if you're using the offset, right? So everything goes towards white. So it's a matter of like how we gonna, you know, it's like for your own taste. I mean, like if you want more overall reflection in the whole face, right? You're probably gonna be playing with the alpha gain in here, right? And then if you wanna kind of like, okay, there's like, it's too shiny in the nose, but it's not shiny enough in other areas, you can add a little bit offset in here and just add a little bit more spec in the other areas. Because again, this is the specular map, but bump depth is actually controlling a lot of how the specular is behaving in those other areas, right? So that's how we're gonna be controlling, you know, it's like if you add a little bit more here, it's gonna be like a matter of like how it looks like for your custom model, right? Like it's a different model than my model. So now we have plugged the cell noise, right? Like it's plugged in there for this micro bump. And we already established that we're controlling the depth of it by using a black and white map with that offset in the exposure. I had to go negative this time. And then here, basically, we're using this one to control the amount of specular in different areas, right? A little bit more specky in the nose and lips, and a little bit less specky in other areas. And then, like I said before, if you opted to do the painting in the opposite, for example, the negative version of what I did in ZBrush, you have this node under effect in here, effects, that's called invert, right? So in this case here is going to be the reverse version of what I had. But obviously now I'm using like some alpha gain, alpha offsets, not going to be precisely, but in theory, it should be basically like the a little bit shinier in the other areas and then a little bit less shiny in the nose, you know, because we're reversing the effect. But at this point here, I like what I see in there. So I'm going to keep it the way it is. Just for comparison, let's just store this one. And then let's remove the alpha is luminous here. So that's basically like the difference between not using a specular map and then using the specular map, right? You're kind of filtering out a lot of stuff. Let's look from a certain distance. Let's turn it on again and see if we are getting some reflections in the forehead as well. slightly, right? It has to be shinier in the tip of the nose, but not so much in the forehead. So at this point here, yeah, getting a little bit more there, not so much in there, right? And then not today, but the next step is to actually add a coat, right? Which we're going to be doing like for the how we call it, the sebum, right? Sebum pass, like it's like the sweat pass. So that's going to be next. But at this point here, just for a first start, you know, it's like for the start, I think is a good place to start. And then if the bump is still a little bit high overall, the only way to decide if it is or not is to combine it with the displacement map. So let's plug the displacement map here, the same one we had from yesterday, which is if you go to your shader network, click that little arrow, gonna have displacement map in there, material. Let's plug a brand new one here. So let's do a file. I'm actually redoing those things from scratch a lot because I want to make sure you guys memorize it, you know, so everything should be good. Because sometimes you miss one step and then things just like fall apart. I really recommend if something you guys are doing is not turning out to be like a mining here, just try to match, for example, like the intensity I'm using ZBrush and all those values and tweaks I'm doing here. You know, it's like if you try to match that, you should get the result. But then if you're not, then we can take a look. You know, it's like I saw, I think last week, a student was posting, I think the model looked like a, you know, it's like very subsurfacey. And it's probably like something related to the scale being incorrect, you know. Yeah, just like do a little recap and you should get the information in the video. So let's take a look at the displacement map. This one here, number 6, that's from yesterday. So I got the displacement, I got 3 files in there from the UDIM. Everything looks good, right? So let's do a comparison. So this is gonna be our render without the displacement. And then let's try to render with displacement here. And again, my displacement is not super deep, right? Like it's just enough to break up the surface. So let's see how it behaves together with this little noise around this area here, for example. So yeah, it's playing nicely, you know, it's like it's, I'm getting the breakup in there, and then I'm getting like the shiny area in the nose. And still getting my pores around there. They're not deep, they're deep enough, right? Those ones are the ones I didn't clean up in the neck just yet. They're still very deep in comparison to those ones that we kind of like did some smoothing yesterday. And then here in the eye, we are supposed to be getting, let's see, I see in there, it's just like very subtle. Those little micro wrinkles you sculpted yesterday. Let's see if we can pick from around here. Just do a little close up right here. You should be seeing like those little, yeah, those little wrinkles that we sculpted yesterday. They are there. And you see that they are there together with this little micro noise in there, this micro bump, right? So it's starting to come together. Let's see if I got some of them. They're so micro, the ones I sculpted yesterday. So if I don't have like a lot of anti-alias in here, they might read just like, you know, just like artifacts. But if I crank the anti-alias, you're probably going to be able to see the micro stuff as well. And also I have to sculpt like some deeper wrinkles and all that stuff, obviously. But let's go back to this area here of the nose again. I like always to contrast between nose and muzzle and the cheeks, because they look a little bit different in terms of the amount of speck you get. So let's do something like that. And then we can just plug back our color in here. So the way Arnold works is this. I mean, like you can have a combination of diffuse and subsurface scattering. And then you use, for example, the combination of both of them to create surfaces like rubber, you know? So for rubber, for example, you see like I got a little bit of the micro wrinkles happening there. For rubber, for example, I'm gonna use a combination of the roughness, the diffuse channel with the SSS. So the way it works is like this. So if you have anything plugged as a base in here, right? That's basically like it's taking over here. If I change anything in the base, it's gonna completely affect whatever I'm doing here right now, because my subsurface scatter is completely off. So it's at 0. But as soon as I start adding more and more scatter, you start seeing a little bit more and more color showing up. But you know, it's like if I'm using, for example, just a tiny little bit of subsurface, let's say like 30% of subsurface, and the rest is coming from the diffuse, right? From the diffuse channel, which is the base in here. Then you're going to start getting like a kind of like a rubbery kind of effect. So if you try to represent like a latex mask or something, you're probably going to be using a lot of more diffuse from the base and less subsurface, right? But in case of skin, I tend to crank all the way to 100, and I use like 100% subsurface scattering. You know, I normally get better results that way. But for certainly specific things, for example, if I want to do like a makeup, right? Like then in that case, instead of using the weight here at 1, I can actually use a mask plugged to this channel, right? Like a black and white mask. And then in areas where I need like makeup applied, I probably don't want a lot of subsurface happening in those areas. Then I can just like, you know, create basically holes in this weight in here, and then just reveal certain areas that don't have the subsurface too evident, right? But overall, if it's just like a simple skin like this, then I would use like the subsurface all the way to 1, right? So at this point here, you can see like it's a little shiny, right? Like because we add a lot of spec. But now, then it's time to actually go and for example, like if you want to use like a diagnostics kind of thing to evaluate your model and render a little bit faster, you can go again like to your render properties, right? And then go to diagnostics here, and you can just turn off the subsurface scattering just to see the spec itself. And then you can isolate just a little area like this. And then you can see, yeah, I can see like the pores in there. I can see there's a little bit of a breakup in the nose in here. I can start seeing some of the micro wrinkles I'm starting to sculpt in there. So things are starting to come together, you know, it's like a first pass and everything. And then, so basically like this is useful, you know, it's like if you want to ignore things, like ignore shadows, right? So you can see things in a different way. You can ignore the displacement map. Right? Ignore displacement map so you can see just the rest of it. Or you can, you know, it's like, I think ignore bump. There's something a little funny about those guys. Sometimes you turn one on and off, like the bump and the displacement, it doesn't show up correctly, but then sometimes it does. I don't know exactly what's going on with it, but it is a little bit buggy. So at this point here, so the overall look looks shiny, right? Like I'm not like buying it because it looks shiny. But I have to keep in mind that my model, I don't have any detail in the nose just yet, right? Like, so if I go back to ZBrush, I have to keep all those things in mind. I mean, like if I don't have any detail sculpted in the nose, I cannot expect that anything is gonna look very realistic at this point, right? And I have to actually break up the surface, add some pores in there and all that stuff, and then come back to Maya and then evaluate this area again and say, oh, okay, so at this point here, turns out that the specular level that I have right now is actually quite perfect, right? What's missing is actually more breakup in the surface, and that's gonna come from the sculpture itself. Or it can be like the revelation is, okay, I bring back in here, and even though I have all the detail in place, all of a sudden, yeah, it's looking too shiny. So in that case, I'm gonna go back to my specular, right? I'll go back to my specular in there, and I can do those tweaks again. I mean, I can go to my exposure in here or alpha gain, right? And remove some of the shininess from it. So I'm gonna bring back to 0. If I wanna bring it down completely, right? Let's see, at 0.8, something like that. Then it starts to look more interesting, right? Like it's not super shiny anymore. But again, I wanna make sure that when I sculpt things, the forms themselves gonna be driving the whole thing. I don't want to be cheating with you know, adding more specular just for the sake of it. If I know I can control that surface with the form, right? So I'm gonna actually give preference to the forms themselves. Try to imagine like you're sculpting an actual piece of clay, right? And for example, like you have an actual studio lighting that you're actually illuminating the whole thing. So you're gonna shine the light on the surface of the clay, And then if there's a lot of detail in a certain area, the light's going to become like very broken, right? Like it's going to become very diffuse because it's going to be reflecting to a lot of different angles because of how uneven the surface is. But then in the nose, if it's like a very smooth surface, you're going to notice a lot more speck happening there. So that's basically what we're trying to achieve here, is like use the sculpture itself to break up all those forms, right? So for now, that's basically what we have in terms of you know, the fill maps we plug, which is just like the bump depth and then the specular. And then the other ones we're going to be including like in the next days, right? But for now, let's talk about the sculpture a little bit more. Let's do a little bit of sculpture in the nose because we need that detail to show you. And also go around the eyes as well and add some more hero stuff in there. Let's just save this file the way it is. 9, right there. And basically like this lighting setup I'm using here is this is the one that I show you like in the like first or second day, right? It's just like second day, I think. That was just like the 3-point light. So it's good enough to model the character, you know. It's like basically like I can show you the positioning here. It looks like this. So I have one from the top down in here, not precisely 45 degrees, right? But just enough down. I mean, like if you want to recreate that Rembrandt kind of lighting, basically what you do, you start with just one single light and you try to put like 45 degrees to the side, 45 on the top, and then you point to the character in an angle, sorry, sorry, an angle that actually can hit the character in this type of angle right here. So you create that little triangle underneath one of the eyes, right? Like the Rembrandt light is kind of like that little triangle. So when you get that little triangle under one of the eyes, then you got that type of like Rembrandt light, right? So it's kind of like it's an interesting light because it has enough angle to produce some shadows underneath the eyebrows and things like that. And it really helps to model the forms, right? So it's similar to what I have. It's not quite 45, but you can see there's a little bit of that triangle is starting to appear in here. If I want a little bit more evident, I would probably like reduce the size of my area light to create something that's a little bit more less diffuse, right? The shadow is not so soft. It would be a little bit harsher shadow, and I would have a little bit more of that. And then obviously right now I have a backlight and I have a side light. And if I'm going for the Rembrandt light, I would go just like start with one single light and then turn the tone of the light a little bit more, a little yellower, right? Trying to get that mood of, you know, it's like back in the day, they have like, you know, it's like, let's talk about the old masters, right? Like from the 1500s, 1600s, right? No electricity, kind of like, you know, it's like probably like candles around or something like that. And try to imagine that, or for example, like a window up there. And that window can be under any time of the day, right? So if they are painting, let's say like in the sunset, to get that yellow light to kind of like mimic like a kind of like a candle light, they would paint probably like around that time to capture that type of light, right? Or they can use actual candles and just have them hanging in some corner, you know, it's like just to create that effect. So if you're trying to reproduce that kind of stuff, you're gonna have to go for like a warmer, you know, it's like type of light. So smaller Kelvin, right? Like so around like maybe like 4,000, 4,500, something like that, to get a little bit more yellow light. In this case here, we are calibrating everything at 7,000 Kelvin. So it's kind of quite white light, like kind of like daylight, between like 6,500 and 7,000, I believe. So in this case here, that's basically what we have. So from the top and then one side light and then a backlight. In terms of intensity, I'm using here 13 for this one. I'm using normalized, right? This one is at 10, so 13 and then 10. It's smaller as well. And then the back one is at 12.5, right? And then I'm getting this type of lighting here, which models pretty nicely. You can see the silhouette, especially him like being bald, you know. You can see the silhouette, a little bit of the back lighting and the ears in there, right? So it's kind of nice. And we are not using yet we might use or not in the character here. In the Arnold's manual, they recommend to use, for example, for skin, the shin thing here, like this node. But the thing about the Shin is that it simulates like a microfiber, right? So, for example, if you have some kind of like a satin or you know, it's like velvet, stuff like that, cloth, you can simulate it by using this Shin here, using the right amount of roughness. So, for example, if you want to do as an exercise, if you click presets and you do like, for example, velvet, and they replace everything, you're probably going to see Arnold adding some, you know, Shin in here. So when I use the Shin, I use very, very little. It creates this tiny little Fresnel effect, you know. It can be a very strong Fresnel effect as well if you're using something like for microfiber, right? But in his case, I mean, like in all those characters I model, I try to keep things a little bit more physical. So I'm going to get a lot of that effect coming from the actual pitch fuzz I'm going to be putting on. So I'm not going to be faking too much, you know, but a tiny little bit sometimes helps. I mean, if it's just a tiny little thing, you know, it's like 0.05 or something, like, or 0.10, whatever, you know. But at this point, we're not going to be using here. So file is saved. Let me just double check. They saved just recently. 10, 15, 26. Yeah, so okay, this one was saved before. So let's go back in here to ZBrush and let's do some sculpting and explore some more brushes today. Let's get to my, how was this part about the maps? Do you guys have any questions about it? Definitely going to be repeating a lot of that, but yeah, just in case if you guys are.
Hi, Chris.
Yes.
I was wondering regarding lipstick.
Uh-huh.
I'm doing a woman. Like, except the color, what other maps, if there are any, would you use, let's say?
Oh, for the lipstick to create like makeup and stuff?
Yes, in the sense that it the lipstick has its own density. I mean, it's separate. It's a separate thing than the lip. Looking on the Daniel Boschung website, I was noticing something I didn't notice before, that it's a very separate. I mean, you see it on the surface. And I was thinking is if when you do lipstick, if you use some special maps for it.
Yeah, so there are two ways I can approach, right? Like, so the first one would be trying to understand the surface by looking at it and imagining like, okay, how much subsurface I'm able to see through it, right? So that would be the first thing. So if you're still seeing a little bit of subsurface scattering through it, then I would say like a simple black and white map plugged into the subsurface weight here, you can actually control that. That would be the first step, I would say. You know, it's like it's really try to find out if there's any scattering still being produced within that those limits. And then the second one is like, okay, is it a glossy surface? If it's like, you know, it's like it's a super glossy type of, you know, lipstick or something. If that's the case, you're going to be playing with a map for the coat, right? And then that has to be baked as well for the specular map and also for the bump depth map. You have to completely eliminate if it's like a super glossy surface. It kind of like the glossy type of lipstick is going to cover the cavities. And it's going to look like pretty much like a, you know, it's like a very shiny surface. And in that case, you have to eliminate any, you know, it's like detail or anything from all the maps. If you still have the detail in there, represented as displacement map, right? But then you have like, you know, little chunks of lipstick showing. And you can see that like it's a kind of like a thick crust that's actually completely eliminating the displacement, the subsurface scattering. Then you can do like a combination, for example, like you can either play with the subsurface weight using this map to filter it. So like going to be a black and white map, removing a lot of the subsurface from the lip area. But you can also use a layer shader in Maya. You know, I used the layer shader just once. That's for this albino lady that I did. And I think it's this one here, the AI layer shader. And basically like you can plug like different shaders to it. So you can have like plug like different ones. And you can control the mix between the shaders using this mix channel here, which is also controlled by a map. So you can plug like multiple shaders and then control how they mix with each other just by using a black and white map as well. So it's like an option between going more complex by using a layer shader that's, it's gonna add much more like nodes for you. Or if it's something you can get away just by using like a mask for the subsurface, I would go that route first,
Okay, clear, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, the makeup can add some complexity to the shader for sure, but yeah, there's always a way to, always a way to go around things for sure. So for the nose, let's take a look at the nose here, because right now we don't have any details, and we know that we're gonna need some detail in there to break up the surface, but not to the point that's gonna go like too bumpy, right? There's a big difference between a nose that's, like I said, it's like the skin is still pretty much like a kid's skin in many aspects. It's not gonna be like a super deep pores or anything like that. But there's this whole like the underneath structure that's kind of like aged, right? It's like an interesting concept like we talked about yesterday. This is very different than looking at something like this, right? I mean, if you're sculpting like old people, you're probably gonna go for something more extreme like that, right? But in his case, we are gonna have to find a balance between like having some of that. I can even go like full of, it's like blackheads, right? Because I mean, if I look at my friend Sven's nose in here, it's like probably like in his 50s in here, right? You're gonna see like you got like those micro veins in there, has all the hair. You have like those little black heads and everything, right? But they're not super deep. They're broken up in there, but not very deep. But for a little kid, I mean, like although my kid, he has those little, it's like black heads, tiny black heads since he was like 4 years old. It's kind of funny. He has little hairs, it's like coming out of them. It was like, dude, that's weird, but very cute. But in this case here, I'm gonna try to do something that's a little bit more discreet. But I'm still gonna show you guys the brush that I use here. So I have a couple of things. I have this pimple in here. So that's like a pimple number 3 that I call. So this one, if I just sculpt, is a drag rectangle, right? It's gonna be simple like this, right? It's kind of has this, it's like roundness to it. The alpha I'm using, I don't remember exactly which one that is. It's hard to tell by just looking. I wish ZBrush showed that. But I'm using, you see like the focal shift, that's the main trick in here. Instead of 0, I'm bringing it out to -59. So he actually creates like, you see like this double edge, red edge that I see here. It's pretty close, right? So if I go to 0, you see what happens in there? Kind of opens up and closes, right? So if I go like all the way to -100, it gets very sharp around the edges. And if I go all the way to this, then it's just like I spike, right? So I'm kind of using like the first thing I'm doing is just like bringing it down to minus here, 59. And then the alpha, it's going to be hard for me to guess here, but let's try like 37. That's not quite it. 36, no. It's one of those, man. 38. Nah, it's not the same. Yeah, it's like, it's hard for me. I wish it, let's try 49. Yeah, 49 should be good. Let's try with 49. And then basically for the alpha, the curvature in here, the difference is that instead of doing that kind of like funny spike, imagine that this is basically like the point of my brush, right? So if I make something spiky here, that's going to be the point. And then this one is the profile of the brush basically, right? So it starts like with a little fade in, it gets a little higher, a little bit rounder at the top. So it creates this little profile like that, right? And then obviously if you increase the intensity, you're gonna get like different results, right? You're gonna get like really, it's like a mole in there. So that's the first one that I use. So this is like just for little bumps around the skin. So for example, like I can use that one as with a base on the standard brush, like we talked about yesterday, or I can use something like this one here, Pimple Elastic, right? Which instead of being created over a standard brush, is created over the elastic brush with a smaller intensity at 53, an alpha plugged in there. And the difference between that one and this one is that this one, if I go, it's gonna go underneath the skin. So it's not gonna obliterate and destroy the pores, right? It can really distort things without destroying the the detail that I have in there. So this is a very useful one to create like different pimples everywhere. And obviously, like you're gonna be using like different sizes and different intensities. So from time to time, you're gonna be playing with the intensity, right? We're gonna be using this one to do the little bumps underneath the eyelids in there pretty soon. I'm gonna go discreet again, like he's a little guy, so I'm gonna have to be very discreet with everything I do with him, otherwise it's gonna look funny. All those pores, they look very spread out. Here I'm gonna be putting some in-betweens in there and filling up this area, making it a little bit tighter. Yeah, it's gonna be all part of our process. And then let's take a look at this pimple number 2 in here. So this pimple number 2, it's a little bit more spiky like that, using the same principle, right? So I use like my focal shift is a little different, minus 0.35. I'm using like for my alpha itself, I'm actually playing with some values in here. For example, the radial fade, I'm cranking all the way to 100, right? With value at 50. So this one is not like, doesn't have anything fancy going on, but the fancy one is this one here. Check this out. Not fancy, right? It's just cool. So pimple number 1, it has this different kind of look in there. And this is all coming from a couple of things. So the focal shift in this one is 0. But look at the curve that I'm using here. So I start this one from the standard brush, as you can tell by the icon, right? And then for the alpha, I believe I started with 39, but we have to check. And then the trick is all in the profile here. So the profile that I made looks like this. So I create a bunch of like points. So basically what it does, it starts the surface of the skin right there. It goes down right there, and then it goes up again and creates a spike at the end, right? So it's gonna look very weird in artificial when I assign, for example, like by itself like that, right? It's a little strong as well, so I can reduce the intensity a little bit, something like this, right? But it's cool because it goes down and comes out, and then you can get this little impression, but it doesn't look great when you look like in an empty space like that, but it starts to work when you go, for example, like and you use in the context of skin itself, right? So if you have like some pores in there in place, and then you just put those little guys right in the middle like that, right? And even like some loose one in there, then they start to work more, become more interesting, you know? So the first thing you're gonna be doing, you're gonna be adding some pores around this area here, so we can actually introduce some of those little pimples, right? So very easy to create. I mean, like, what brush do you use, bro? You know, that whole question about like, what brush do you use, bro? Yeah, if everybody did this class here, they would be shocked. You know, it's like that. I use like all very simple vanilla brushes. It's just like tweaked and, you know, with a little curve tweaks here and there. I'd rather teach how to make it than actually, you know, give it for free, because people just get lazy and they don't play with the tools, you know. It's like they don't learn how to make their own stuff. So I'd rather like teach how to fish. I think is more interesting. It's a better way to learn, I guess. So let's start with a simple patterning here. Let's use that brush that I show you guys. That's the random skin random. I think I saved one that was the skin random elastic, right? This one we created yesterday. So that same one we created yesterday, I'm gonna be using just to add a little bit of texture around the nose. I'm gonna make symmetrical, and then let's go a little bit less intense, maybe 20. And let's go with like a circular pattern like this. It's like I'm spinning my brush. You can tell by the, you know, the movement in there in the mouse, just spinning and going like in you know, it's like a different, but one thing I noticed here is that my spray is a little bit too spread out. So I'm gonna add some flowy here, maybe like 0.1, so I can get more of them per spray. So yeah, so it's gonna be a little bit faster to fill up that. So just gonna start with this very, very subtle pattern. I'm gonna go everywhere here. I'm gonna actually, right in the middle, just gonna break up the symmetry here. You can go like in this middle area. Work on it all the way down here. Around there, and then I'm gonna turn on the symmetry again. It's very, very subtle. I mean, like everything I'm doing with this guy, I'm trying to keep things very subtle, and then whatever doesn't work, I can just go back to ZBrush, and it was like, okay, I know I can crank this further because now I'm not seeing anything, right? So I'm gonna go all the way and always like in circular motion like that. And I'm gonna add a lot of them in this whole area nose. Just keeping in mind that if you had too much breakup, you're never gonna be able to get that super shiny speck in the nose, right? So it's a combination of like add the detail first, make sure it's there. And then if you need to smooth it out a little bit, just to reveal a little bit more of smooth surface underneath, then that's the next step. That's what we're gonna have to do. So let's keep doing like the circular motion. And then when I get around this area, I can start actually adding some direction, right? So I'm gonna go from here to here. And then I'm gonna keep this direction here towards the nose. And then over the nose. And then here I can start spiraling again and just like blending this with this little pattern, right? Like it's just circular motions, just like lots of circles like that to get this kind of like leathery feel to it. Which again, like, you know, it's like if you look at the real skin, that's not what you're seeing in real skin, right? It's a combination of trying to reimagine the skin and paint an impression of it, right? Something that's gonna work when you render it. But I mean, like you can always rely on, for example, like really go to town with like a super precise approach to it, right? Or something that you see that looks different from what I see. For example, like all of us, like we have different ways of seeing things. And, or you can rely on texturing XYZ, you know, because I always tell you guys, I mean, like if this whole process is too much of a torture to the point that it's actually stopping you from being more creative, you know, it's like, by all means, I mean, like use something that works for you, or use either like the whole pipeline that I'm showing you guys, or use part of it or none of it, you know, whatever you guys feel like it works for you, you know, it's especially more experienced artists, you know. There is an artist who is incredible. He posted some work and it was after he took my class. It's that nun, right? You saw it posted, basically like his wife as a nun. And he is an amazing artist, man. I always like his art. And he bought one of my classes, and it was like, why did you buy the class? I mean, like, you're so good. And he said, like, yeah, I was very curious about this HD geometry type of approach, you know. It's like, and he said that was the cherry at the top. That was basically like what was missing in my puzzle, you know. So he actually used more of that aspect of the HD geometry to his pipeline, but he kept using his V-Ray, you know, it's like, but the detail, he sculpted everything by hand. So he used kind of like the inspiration of this thing about like feeling accomplished doing the detail by hand, you know, so he did the whole thing by hand. And also he used the HD geometry. So I mentioned to him, and like I asked like in private, you know, I was like, just make sure, you know, it's like, because I don't want to plug your work and just like pretending I helped you with anything if you didn't use anything. He's like, no, I used this and that. You feel free to just repost it. So he was super nice. And then I repost like obviously in my Instagram, and people like, oh my God. And I even post like, this is better than my work, you know. This is really amazing. But he really went to town, man. It's the kind of stuff, like this kind of stuff is the kind of work that it's very individual oriented, right? Like, I mean, like if you are someone who has a ton of patience to sculpt everything by hand, you're going to love this pipeline, because I mean, like you're really going to be able to go to town with your detail, you know. And there's no limit. I mean, like it's as much as you want to add, you know. But if you are relying more like on the, you know, kind of like alpha side of things, then you might be better off with texturing XYZ, you know, so I can just do it. At the end of the day, the result is what going to be the important part, right? If you have a model that's completely done by hand, and then you have a model that's done using a lot of you know, textures pre-made and stuff, and at the end of the day, it's the story, you know. It's like, it's how you're going to communicate, is how how cool the model is going to look at the end, you know. It's like, or the scene, you know. It's like if you're building a scene, and then and that's what's going to matter, you know. It's like if someone who never saw your work before just finds it on the internet, they're not going to be concerned about, oh, he sculpted everything by hand, or did everything with texturing XYZ. They don't even know what that is, right? They're only going to judge like, oh, is it cool work? Does it look nice? Does it communicate? You know, it's like, do I feel connected to the work somehow? Right? That's the important thing. That's our function as artists, right? Like to communicate and to be able to convey ideas and things like that. So I'm not going to be judging. You know, it's like now when you see this type of work, for example, like in our you know, communities, for example, like people who actually do CG for a living or really love that kind of stuff, then yes, people are going to be judged by what they are doing. You know, it's like, and it's a normal thing. I mean, like if you're someone passionate about art, right? Like you grew up like looking at paintings, you know, it's like done like amazing stuff without any of this technology we have nowadays. You have that thing about, you know, it's like you respect the, you know, the artistry behind what's being done now. So when I see something done by someone like him, you know, it's like everything by hand, and it looks more realistic than the stuff I make, you know, I have total respect for that, you know. It's like, because first, he's reinventing things, right? Like using his own hands and in managing to create something hyper real, you know, it's like artistically, you know, it's like not necessarily, it's not like a exactly like nature portrays it, but it's a great representation, you know. It's like it's something that I really like about this whole thing, you know. It's like it's this feeling of accomplishment for doing something that sometimes it's hard to accomplish, even like using all kinds of tricks in the book, you know. It's like using scan data, and then people use scan data, and then you use like all those pre-made textures and pre-made alphas and everything, and then all of a sudden someone like him comes and then does everything by hand, and it looks better, you know what I mean? Like it's an extra dose of kick-assery. You know, it's I really appreciate that kind of stuff. That's why I try to, you know, encourage my students to do things by hand, because you definitely learn a lot with the process, and you feel accomplished just by being able to recreate something, you know, and create in a convincing way. But I'm talking here, I'm sculpting those tiny micro wrinkles with my carve brush, right? If you want to use like the DAM standard, for example, go ahead and do it. You know, it's like I don't use it because I don't like some aspects of it, like the pinching and stuff. But it's basically like what the DAM standard would do, you know. So I nothing against, again, like you're completely free. I'm not a Nazi teacher at all, you know. It's like I'm pretty open for whatever you guys want to do. I just want to make sure that what I'm teaching is helping you guys to improve, you know. It's like, it's just like with him, you know, it's like if it's a few aspects of what I'm teaching or everything, you know, something that's going to help you guys as artists, then that's going to make me really happy, you know. But you see, like this area here, I'm actually starting to sculpt those micro wrinkles very horizontal in here, because there's a compression, right? Like when you have like all the facial expressions, like for anger and all this stuff over time, you start baking more and more wrinkles, right? But at this point here, I'm thinking about like his age, and I'm thinking about like maybe trying to imagine the type of skin he might have, and try to go low intensity at first, and then later on, if necessary, try to increase more and more. So I'm actually using some of the rationality here to introduce like these lines going towards the pores around there. At this point here, if it's just on the side, I'm actually using symmetry just to save myself some time. But then around the middle area, I'm just breaking up the symmetry completely in there, right? So anything you can do, because remember at the end, we're gonna be modifying like the overall symmetry of the bigger form. So a lot of this stuff is, you're not gonna even notice it's symmetrical, you know? So around here, I'm gonna start digging some wrinkles and make it a little bit deeper. And then let's go sub. I have this thing about like I use Z add, and then when I need to carve the wrinkles, I have to press Alt to reverse it, right? But obviously, if you're keeping Z sub at all times, you don't need to press Alt. I just got used to it, you know. It's like to the point that for certain brushes, I use a lot of add and Z sub just by alternating with Alt. And then I get confused if I'm not using add with Alt pressed, you know. That's what happens when you're old and stupid. But in this case here, I'm just gonna keep like Z sub, so I know I'm just gonna be carving it. And I turn on my symmetry again. So just gonna be adding some of those wrinkles around here, a little bit broken up, so kind of crisscrossing a little bit like that. Create that little effect. And then from time to time, I can just like extend them a little bit. And again, I'm gonna make sure that they are thin enough, you know, so I can see in the first renders. And if they are too thin, then I know like, okay, I can crank this much more. But at this point here, just crossing some of them to create a little bit of this effect of kind of elephant skin in there. So some of them are gonna come in different directions like that. And then from time to time, I'm gonna feel like, okay, I need to add some more hero ones. So for example, right in the middle in here, I'm not looking at reference, I'm kind of like imagining here, but you know, it's like you can add like a one that's more visible like that goes across. Another one more parallel to that. And then around here, same deal. Let's do a little bit thicker around here. And obviously like this, this whole area is not resolved yet. You see like it's a little lumpy, but this area I'm gonna make like slowly gonna be making more and more flashy. Oh, there goes zebra shooting across stuff. And then let's just go and represent those wrinkles around there a little bit deeper. And then cross them with something else like that. And then make sure it's like I mentioned before, you know, it's like that things are not looking too, you know, repetitive. So if you have certain things going a certain direction, change the direction slightly, like in terms of diagonal. And then from time to time, you can actually introduce parallel lines as well. So just adding tiny little things like that just to break up. I'm gonna go back around here. And then let's do like symmetrically now. Let's see, is it symmetrical? Yes. So I'm gonna just bring some of them from the outside in here. Tiny ones. Trying to create a little bit more rhythm in here. You can see right there. And then I'm gonna be crossing them over. Well, let's try to avoid like this, you know, things being too repetitive and the same angle. So changing angles, then bringing like that. And you see like it's just like an extra layer on top of that super thin layer that we had before. And then slowly, you're gonna be building up those networks of forms in here. Let's get this one more broken, crossed. When you get to around this area here, you can start actually drawing the wrinkles to favor and kind of like represent this little squint expression. So I'm gonna be bringing them from here to inside and then out again around here. Just gonna build some of those little tiny wrinkles just as a placehold. And I'm gonna use a clay build up in here just to help to emphasize that. So let's do a little bit more in here. Again, I cannot go too crazy with the depth, otherwise he's gonna start looking super old. And that's not what we want for this guy. But I mean, in your case, it's your model, we can do whatever you need. I mean, if you need to go super deep in there. So now I have that. Let's try to build up those little guys. See, I actually just blocked some directions in there. Let's switch to the clay build up. I have my alpha, my round alpha in there. I believe like which one I used, that was 37, 36 or something. And then let's just do like go to a couple of resolutions, resolution levels lower. So like 2 subdivision level lower. And then intensity at 3. So just gonna do little passes like this, just to help like this little webbing to look like there's like kind of thin skin being compressed around here. I'm gonna bring this up a little bit. And spread and create that little webbing. Remember, I spoke about that for this area here, right? Like, just like with the clay build up, you can actually fill those gaps and make those bridges. That's basically what I'm doing there, like creating micro bridges in this area here. So going from one place to another. So from time to time, you're just gonna use your clay build up, you know, just to help like to add more like bigger forms. Just like I said the other day, you know, it's like everything is like, can be considered like a new creature, right? Like if you take this, I mean, like if you really wanna go to town when it comes to details, you're gonna actually try to imagine each one of those areas as being a monster, right? So if that's the case with the power of HD geometry, you definitely can go to town, you know, it's like can add a ton of detail. And then really create like multiple little creatures within that face. But if you're trying to paint an impression that's kind of like more like for a faraway shot, then you don't need to go that detailed, right? But I tell you, it's always impressive for whoever is seeing your work, right? Like when they see the care you put in, it's like and it's a unique thing, you know, it's like because it's coming from you, it's the way you are observing the subject and everything. There's no replacement, you know, it's like nobody's gonna do what you do. Like if the way you're sculpting the pores, for example, there is nobody on planet Earth that's sculpting a pore that's exactly like the pore you're sculpting, you know. So basically, like your style starts right there, you know, it's like with tiny little things like that, and it kind of like propagates to everything else in your work. So at the end of the day, you can go to the same classes other artists went, and the results are still going to look different, you know. It's like you're still going to preserve your style. I heard before, like people doing my classes, they kind of like having similar renders and stuff, and I get that. It's because like basically like we are using mostly like the same HDRIs, you know, and the render settings are pretty similar. But when it comes to the style and the sculpture itself, I think they look very different, you know. It's like, but yes, when it comes like to the way that I make eyes, for example, which I think they look very, very nice. You know, they look convincing at the end. I think like, yeah, the students who actually take that to heart and build the eyes the same way and add like the similar HDRI, you know, it's like definitely going to have like a similar style overall, but it's just like a style for render, you know, it's like not a style for a sculpture, I would say. But unless you're talking about pores, obviously, like, you know, it's like a lot of people posting work in progress of pores, you know, it's like, and they are like, oh yeah, you're learning with Chris Costa, right? Because, you know, it's like, it looks exactly the way that he's doing it. But yeah, so there are definitely a couple of things in there, but depending on the artist, you can make it unique enough, you know, it's like that looks very different from anything else that we are doing. So that's going to be kind of like on you to use the powers for good, not for evil. But yeah, so at this point here, I'm just like, you see, like refining the forms, introducing some more stuff. Now I actually went a couple of resolutions down here so I can actually add some more of this webbing kind of thing, right? It's a little bit more organic. There is one thing I use as well, which is the inflate brush. But the inflate brush I normally use for like older people, right? When I want to have like the forms to collide with each other a little bit more. But I always tell my students this. I mean, like the inflate brush is a tricky one because the default value is 10, right? And let's say like you do something like this. You just like inflate right there. I was like, oh man, look at that, looks cool. All those things got pretty tight, right? I was like, oh, nice. Then you go behind the model and you look at it and you get something like that, right? And that's gonna fuck up your displacement map. So basically, like when you try to export displacement maps, those are gonna look like white spots in there. It might create spikes in your render. So sometimes you get like some artifact and you cannot figure out what's going on. And sometimes it's displacement map that's screwed like that. So there are ways to fix, obviously, which is like you come from the inside, turn off your RGB in there, and then you can slowly just like from the inside smooth this out. So you can actually get rid of those crunches in there, right? But I would say like the best practice would be to actually not exaggerate the, let's undo it here for good. Not exaggerate the inflate, you know? So if you have the inflate, instead of using 10, try to start with like a 2 for intensity. And instead of using like a tiny little brush, use a little bit more of a broad brush like this. And then when you do the smoothing, you can get that organic feeling, right? The things get a little bit more pinched and everything. And then you go inside, things are still in place, right? So it's not like things are completely destroyed at this point. So you still can get that little pinch, look very nice in there, natural, without destroying the inside, right? So you got, sharp enough, but not like crazy sharp. And then on top of that, you can use that same technique I showed you guys the other day, which is like sculpt the wrinkles from the inside. So you switch to add instead of like, the sub. And you can go and really see, for example, like if I want to make this deeper, I go right over this wrinkle here and sculpt on top of it again. The same for this one. Oops. Like that, right? When you go back, then you have like a deeper wrinkle in there. So those things always help, you know, it's like to add a little bit of more of like an organic feeling to it. So let's see how we're doing with time. Let's just do one more thing here for today, which is like, you see, like I started by blocking those things, like those little small forms yesterday. Then I put some bigger forms, and now I kind of like filling the gaps, the in-betweens, and start to merge them. And then using this technique in here for the nose, right? Like just to get a little bit more detail. So let's do a couple of things. Let's try to do very quickly here the bump elastic, the pimple elastic that I showed you before. The pimple elastic I'm going to be using for this area here, which normally we have, oh, look what I did there. Huh, interesting. I think it was the symmetry was kind of weird in there. So I'm probably going to have to retouch that later. It's not a problem. You just like, let's just remove some of that craziness in there right now. Go to the lowest level here, just smooth it out. That wasn't supposed to be there, but you know, not a big deal. I'm gonna have to work asymmetrically quite a bit. And I was just trying to save some time, but I shot myself in the foot. So let's just smooth this out. And then when you go up, we should see things a little bit better. And then I finish my tweaks later. Let's do it here. Yeah, a little bit better. So let's take a look at this these little bumps. So I have my elastic pimple, right? The one I showed you before. So let's start around this area here with the asymmetry off. And let's see how strong this is. It's good. It's just a little bit. So I'm gonna be doing, let me just increase here so you can see what I'm doing. But around this area, right in between those wrinkles here, I'm gonna start putting little pimples like that. But if you go too crazy with them, if they're too strong, then they're gonna read like a bunch of moles, right? You didn't want that. You want something that's a little bit more like a little bit more organic. So basically, like it's gonna do this, and then from time to time you can actually increase the depth, and then I'm changing the sizes as well. So kind of like adding more, you know, a little bit more size in there. Let's do some of them around here. It's very, very discreet, right? You can barely see them right now. But from time to time, I can just go a little bit higher and just add like a bigger one right there. Maybe a little bigger right here. And then all around the eyelids, I'm gonna make this one symmetrical. For the eyelids, it's an interesting one because you can either add them right now, right? Because you're definitely gonna get like some ingrown hair in there. Or you can wait until we have actual eyelids, eyelashes in place. And then I can show you a way to actually capture that into a map and use that map, you know, like as a reference for where the pimples are actually happening. So we can actually sculpt the pimples right where the hairs are. Or even simpler than that is to export the hairs from XGen to geometry. And then you bring them into ZBrush. And then you have like a precise idea where they are happening. And then you can create those little guys right at the roots. You know, it's like, it looks very nice at the end. So for now, I'm just gonna add a few of them. I might, you know, eliminate some of them later, but just a few of them in there just to break up the surface. And I'm definitely gonna be sculpting more. But just remember that I have to readjust my edges in here. That's why I'm not gonna be too crazy right now, because I wanna make sure that things are, you know, are working for when I place the eyelashes. So I'm gonna go back in here, add some more around there and around this whole area. So basically like this, I'm gonna be doing around this area here in the inside of the eye. So basically around here, right? Mostly like down here. So we're gonna be adding some of those guys. Gonna be breaking up the surface some more with like this crisscrossing effect. And then from this area here, I'm gonna jump right back to the nose. Let's do some, you know, pimples in here. So I'm gonna go, for example, to my trusty single pore brush, made in Singapore. That's not a good joke. So single pore, I'm gonna go to, my intensity by default is 40, right? That looks like a very deep butthole in there, but we are not gonna go that deep. I'm gonna go, let's try 20 something, because now I'm actually trying to reproduce what I created in here, right? So I think 24 looks kind of good, look. So if I do that, I can actually see them blending together with the ones I made softer. And again, I'm gonna probably create some in-betweens in here. I'm gonna turn on my symmetry right now, because I noticed some of them a little bit too spread out. So I'm gonna create some in-betweens. I was like, from time to time, just like find those gaps and then add some more in there. So when it comes to the nose, there are a couple of ways I do this. So for example, if I want like some pores around the nose, I try not to go with the same type of pore that you're seeing here. Otherwise it's gonna look all the same, right? Like you're not gonna be able to differentiate what is like this muzzle area and the nose pores. So I try to make them a little bit different. So one way to do that, you go a couple of subdivision levels like lower than what you have. So for example, like 2 down or 3 down. And then I can increase my density, the intensity here. And then I can add my pimples. That's a little bit too low. Let's go one more. So at subdivision level 2 here inside of HD. And then if I add my pores in there, now they are like not being applied in a very low res, in a very high res, right? So if I go up in resolution, they're gonna look a little bit more blurry than those ones you're seeing around here, right? So you see like they're a little bit more blurry overall. So that's like the approach we're gonna be doing. Probably like I went a little bit too deep. I'm gonna try a little bit less than that. And so I'm gonna keep going for a little while here, just adding more and more of those guys. And again, try not to go like too crazy with it, because if it's a little kid, right, we want to try to avoid making like an orange peel all over the place. Just gonna try to transition between those pores in there from this cavity here, and then transitioning into those other ones here. Everything has to read like it's coming, one form becoming the other, you know, it's like one type of skin becoming the other type of skin by like slowly building those things as a transition, you know. It's like, so if you see those pores in there, you see that they start fading around here. So I can slowly, you know, it's like try to fade them away by adding more and more spread out versions of them like that. It's almost like, try to imagine like this is kind of like a piece of cloth or elastic, kind of elastic type of cloth, right? That's covering this whole structure in here. And then when it gets to an area that has like this big form in here, like with the cartilage and the nose and everything pulling this entire thing, imagine that everything is kind of getting stretched, and then the pores that you see in a relaxed area like this, all of a sudden they start getting shallower and shallower around here. So they kind of like start getting a little bit lost, more lost. So that's basically what I'm going to be doing there. So for the nose, I'm going to keep applying some of those in a lower resolution, like I said. I can keep going with them all the way underneath here, but probably not too much around, you know, the nostrils themselves. But like in the base here, I can go maybe introduce some of them like that. And again, this is like not at the highest resolution, right? It's just to get like deeper and more diffuse, like more blurry type of pores. And then you're gonna keep doing this until your heart's content, right? So basically like, gonna be doing some of them in here. And then from time to time, I can go a couple of, you know, go higher in resolution, just like one time, for example. Just add a little bit, one of there that looks a little bit more, you know, defined. And then go back to it. And then after you have that, like, I mean, like you have, let's pretend I'm looking at references. You should be looking at your references right now if you're doing something like that, right? So you got your pores in there. Then you're gonna switch to a pimple like that one I had before, right? And then you're gonna go to an area like this one, and you're gonna say like, okay, I wanna add some actual pimples in here. So you're gonna pick some of those, and then you're gonna fill them with little pimples like that, right? In case you wanna go that extent of detail, you know, it's like you don't need to. I mean, like if it's for a distant shot, I mean, like you're probably not going to be able to see this anyway. But if you're like me, like you would like to experiment with stuff, you know, it's like, and you have fun just like posting pictures of like close-up shots and stuff. You know, it's like, it's kind of cool when you have that type of information in there. Like it's to distract the eyes, right? Like if people look at your work, like they get lost because there's so much stuff to look at, and they forget to look at how sucky the primary forms are, right? So you can trick them like I do. And it's just like, oh my God, so much detail. Never mind that the model sucks. Anyway, so let's go. Yep. So this way here, I mean, like this is just like a few of them. Obviously, you're gonna be, like I said, like look at your references and then seeing how much of that you want to add. You know, it's like if it's a older guy, you're probably gonna have a ton of information, a lot of ideas and fun to do in there. You know, and then so basically like those ones that I'm adding, like kind of like lost in here. You see, like they don't have like a port to support them, right? They're just like a little lost in there. But what you can do, you can actually use another brush. Let's see if I have it here. So I have the bump skin pore depth. So you see this one here. So this one is, I called it pore depth, which is basically the elastic brush with a drag rectangle. I have my alpha plugged in there. And then I have a very, not a very sharp, but a semi-sharp line for my alpha curve. And what this one does, if I exaggerate here, is 42. It does this, look. See, it's a very like spiky thing, and it works in the reverse as well. So if I click reverse, it creates this interesting pointy depth like that. So I use this one with intensity lower than this, like let's say like 40, something like that. And then if I have some area like that, I can actually use right on top of it. Sorry, I did the opposite. With the Alt, and I can dig it around and create a little bit of that effect, you know, like the couch that I was talking about, right? So I can actually go in certain pores later on, if I'm adding more variation, which I definitely have to add much more in-betweens in here. They're still very spread out. But if I want to add like variations for the depth of the pores, I can actually pick one of them like that and just like go right there, you see? Just like add more depth to it, pick another one around there, and try to do this like obviously with different intensities and sizes, so they will look all the same. So it's like slowly you're going to start like building up variation for those pores, and then later on we're going to be adding also some micro scars and also bumps, things like that, and a sculpt like more direction as well in the pores themselves. So this is like a quick way to actually add variation for this for the depth of the pores. You know, it's like you can add a lot of them, or just like from time to time you can get like an area in the cheeks and just like introduce a little bit more like a deeper spot in there, right? If it's too deep, you can actually reduce it 34 or something like that. So add like some depth in certain ones, right? And slowly you start actually building up more asymmetry and more interesting stuff, you know. So yeah, so for today, I think that's what I have, you know. We're gonna be definitely like doing more of this. I probably like while waiting for the videos to process, I'm gonna try to incorporate more of this. I'm not gonna be using any techniques different than what I'm showing you guys here. It's just basically like a repetition of the same thing. So because I have to get stuff moving forward, I have to keep going with it, right? But if there is anything that I do differently than what I'm doing now, I can do a little recap and just show you guys tomorrow. First thing, you know, it's like, okay, so yesterday I experimented with this one, and then I used this different brush I didn't show you guys yesterday. So that's how it works and blah, blah, blah. In the spirit of keeping things transparent, you know. But in terms of the techniques used here, it's going to be basically the same thing. It's going to be, the next step for me is going to be putting more in-betweens in here. You see, like I got some stretching going on, and the pores are very spread out. So I'm going to be getting them like closer, similar to this. So I'm going to put like some in-betweens in there. And then keep sculpting more micro wrinkles, adding more of those bumps in the other side, adding more of those micro little lines in here in the top, right? And then slowly building up this area. I'm gonna try to fix some of the primary stuff that's a little wonky here for the eyelids as well. And then keep working tomorrow, you know, it's like get more stuff done. Yeah. Okay. You guys have any? Yeah.
I have a question. It is not related to pores actually.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a silly question, but I always use FBX from ZBrush because when I export OBJ from ZBrush and I go to Maya, I lose UVs. I don't know if it's normal. So I was wondering if I need to change some settings on ZBrush to fix this issue. Or,
so what's the issue you're getting?
I lose my UVs.
Oh, you lose the UVs.
OBJ from ZBrush.
Yes. Huh.
I always use FBX.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, like, I know that there's a bunch of settings in both Maya. I think like ZBrush has a bunch of settings as well to be able to export everything from the FBX, but I'm not very familiar because I normally just export straight away just the OBJ. Do you have like a specific reason you're using the FBX? Like
for my UVs.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, because the OBJ is going to carry your UVs, right?
Not on Maya. I can't. I don't know. I can't see them.
You can't see them in Maya when you bring from ZBrush?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's weird. Because, yeah, you should be able to actually see them. I mean, like, those models, they are all being exported in OBJs in here. And sometimes what you have to do, I mean, like, if you go to your UV editor, see, sometimes it disappears in here. But if you press, for example, F, you know, it's like to actually frame it, they kind of reappear.
Okay.
Because, yeah, they should definitely be going like between Maya and ZBrush with no problem. You should have like all the UVs in place.
F.
Uh-huh.
No, I can't see them. I don't
know. So every time you export as OBJ, you're losing your UVs.
Yes, every time.
That's very weird. Yeah, because I haven't seen this. If any of you guys seen this before, like if you can chime in, maybe like we can try to help. But I mean, like the settings, I know that sometimes it gets very screwy with ZBrush. Is that like at the very end here, the export? Sometimes if you mess up,
it's very annoying because of the blend shape. And
No, you need this to work for you because
I know.
that's a big problem. Like, did you try to, let's say, to basically like remove all your preferences in ZBrush, do a init ZBrush, and make sure that you have everything like I have here, like quad, TX, and then merge and group?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, man, that's so bizarre. So like if you're bringing your model from, let's say like from Maya, where did you create your UVs? Was it in ZBrush or Maya?
Maya.
Maya, okay. So when you bring the UVs to ZBrush, you don't see them in ZBrush?
From Maya, yes.
From Maya to ZBrush, yes.
Yes.
And then from
also
ZBrush.
Yes. I can see. The problem is the export from ZBrush to Maya.
Yeah.
So I have to export FBX every time. But yes, but it's really annoying because I can't use the blend shape and.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. You shouldn't.
I looked for on the internet, but I found anything, so I didn't find anything.
If you can't send, let's see, if you, for example, like you export this model from Maya into ZBrush, just do like a simple file, you know, it's like export from Maya to ZBrush, just the base mesh, and then if you can send me that file, I mean, like you got the email from the school, right? You can send to that main email, like the contact, and then or you can just let's see, what's the best way? Are we connected on Facebook?
On the group, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're in the group, for example, you can post either like a link in there, or you can send me directly like a file, like you can zip it. And the only thing I want you to do is to export from Maya to ZBrush, and then save this file as a ZTL and then send it to me. Because I want to try like from my side and see if I can export it without losing UVs, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. Because if I can,
so from ZBrush to Maya, not the.
Yeah, I want you to make sure like you have your UVs working in Maya first, right?
Okay.
Where you created them, and then just export this OBJ into ZBrush, and then send me this file, like save the ZBrush file and send it to me. Or if you can just like export the OBJ straight from Maya and send it to me, I can use that as well, and then import on my own here. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
is your texture button on the export menu under the tools menu?
I tried with texture, mRGB groups, everything checked, and also unchecked. I tried everything, I guess.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that's very weird, because if it works on my side, then obviously I can give you back the model, but then we're gonna have to figure it out what's happening to your ZBrush, because apparently the Maya side is okay, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's try that, Sarah.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
I also have some issue, but it's with the Geometry HD.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I put a JPEG into the Zoom group chat.
Okay, let's take a look.
I'm just getting like a small circle instead of like the whole section that I'm looking to sculpt.
Let's take a look. So okay, GeoHD, let's save into desktop. Let's take a look here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what's the resolution you're using for your file at the end? Like your max resolution?
It's about 800,000 before the HD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when you're doing this, like, are you selecting, like, everything is included? For example, like the inside pocket for the mouth and the eyes are all included?
No, just the face and the neck.
Okay, so everything else is hidden.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's try something here. So for example, like if you're seeing my screen here, I'm just gonna pull yours in here. So it's a small section, but it's not like super tiny. I thought it would be smaller. And then I can tell that, let's see, like the amount of polygons you're getting at once. So you're getting like active points, 23.8 million polygons, which is not bad, but it's just a way that it's being displayed in there. So let's take a look at what happens if you try to do this projection instead of like from the front like that. If you try to do it kind of like from the side. So like instead of like selecting the whole thing, right? Like you have visible, try to hide, like just create a mask, for example, like this. Yeah. And then make sure that everything else is hidden inside, like you don't have any pockets for eyes and mouth. And then instead of going from an angle like you have like that, try to do the projection from here. So close to the nose area around here in this corner, press A around there, and you should be able to get more polygons. But there is also something here in the preferences. If you go to preferences mem, make sure that everything here is it's at 50, right? The preview max polygons.
Yeah. I turned that to 100, and in the image you can see in the top left corner, it's not like I'm it's not like I don't have any memory. I had like over 40 gigs left.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the issue is. I can try it on the side.
Yeah, I normally get better results when I do the projection from the side, but it's heavily dependent on the way that your polygons are structured too. You know, I tried to do, for example, like with what's the object I tried was with the teeth. So check this out. So you see, like right now, if I do a projection in this face here from the side, right, I'm gonna get about 35 million polygons worth of polygons. So that's a pretty good number. So check this out. If I go to the teeth geometry, this one, which is quite simple, you know, it's like the geometry is nothing fancy, but I tried this, check this out. So if I have, so this is what I have at the highest resolution is 5 million polygons. So let's do a copy of this thing here. I just want to show you how this thing looks very different than the other one. So we're just gonna go back to 1.270 and I'm gonna delete the resolution in here. So geometry, let's delete the higher, and then I have just this one. So I'm gonna go HD with this model. So I have 1.2 million polygons only. I'm going to subdivide HD. So let's do it as a test here. So divide, let's see, 131. Let's see how much we get. 131, so 150. Yeah, let's try. Should I go higher? That's probably not. Okay, should be good around here. So let's try to go HD in this model here. So I have 1.270. And in theory, I added about 20 million polygons. So this should be 20 million polygons, which is less than the 35 million that I just showed you guys, showing the whole thing. I could sculpt the whole thing in 35 million. If I go to the side here and I try to go HD, look at how many I get. 10 million instead of like the 35 I got before. I got only 10 million. So it's heavily dependent on the geometry, and I don't know exactly what it is, but there is something that's weird, you know. It's like no matter from what angle I try to do this, if I do it from the front, look at that, the circle you're getting, right? It's 10 million polygons, and I have no idea why, but it's definitely related to the topology, you know. It's like it's the way that the topology is put in place. Yeah, I would not have a solution, you know. It's like it's something that we could probably like question the guys at Pixelogic, and they're very good at that stuff, you know. It's like, for example, like if you ask them or open a ticket or something, you know, they are very good at replying. But it's something I would, you know, hope that they fix, because it's such a waste, you know. It's like that's the only reason I'm not going in HD with my teeth, is because I don't like just working in little chunks of 10 million. I'd rather have just like, you know, a single thing, known HD. And so it
also seems like it's not taking into account symmetry.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
So it's the whole thing's strange.
Yeah. But yeah, man, the good thing is that it's not like I said, like it's not a super small area. You still can work, but definitely like if it's something like projected from the side, I would expect at least for you to be able to sculpt the whole mask at the same time, you know.
Yeah.
This is the, like before HD was ZBrush was 64 bits. When it was just 32, the chunks were just like little chunks of 4 million polygons at the time or something like that. And they're very tiny. So you could not ever go to a high resolution like that, you know. Now it's better. So you're still getting like 23 million, almost 24 million polygons. But definitely like there's something about the density of the geometry underneath, you know, that's actually, I don't know how he calculates it, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm sorry I don't have an answer for that, but.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah. All right, guys. I gotta go, and then we keep talking about it. If you can send me that file, Sarah, then I'm gonna take a look, and then meanwhile I'm gonna be doing some more sculpting.
Okay, thank you. I've just solved it.
What's that?
I solved it.
Oh, you solved it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, I did the init ZBrush 2 times in a row. And
okay.
The select and select again, TXR. I don't know. Maybe it's about.
Okay. No problem. All right. Thanks, guys. Have fun.
Bye.
Bye.